Coming up on today's show, we get the very latest on everything that's coming out of Manchester United right now with The Athletic's David Ornstein.
They'd decided that things were not going well enough under Erik Ten Hag and they could get Ruben Amorim.
It's been a graveyard for managers, it's been a graveyard for players.
Unfortunately, VAR is back in focus. We'll get the point of view of former FIFA referee Christina Unkle on Ref Watch.
When you get sent to the monitor, you should sit there and be like, oof, right? You should have that feeling in the pit of your stomach, and that's how you know it's a clear and obvious error.
We're going to talk Rodri, Vinicius Jr., Real Madrid, and the Ballon d'Or. And Gary does not hold back. Neither do I, actually.
To disrespect Rodri in the way in which they have, I think it naturally does that. I think it's absolutely outrageous.
And the Give and Go podcast joins the show to bring us up to date on the playoffs in Major League Soccer.
Then the stars came out for Inter Miami. Not just Messi, not just Suarez, but Jordi Alba with an absolute banger.
So plenty on the way on this week's episode of It's Called Soccer. Hi everybody and welcome to our latest episode of It's Called Soccer. Gary Neville is in some far-flung, if you're watching this, you'll see the palm trees. We can all see the palm trees. Don't know where he is, somewhere on the globe. We don't need to know. And delighted to say that we are joined by The Athletic's David Ornstein, sometimes of NBC, but today of The Athletic. David, as of the time of recording, what is the very latest information? Because of course you were the one that broke the story that Ten Hag had been fired in the first place. Give us everything you know.
Yeah, so Ruben Amorim, Rebecca, Gary, is on track to become the new head coach, the new boss of Manchester United. Of course, they've always had managers until this point, so we'll wait to see the official title. But he is, of course, a head coach. And he's up for taking the job. It's something that he's keen to undertake. So that was the news I broke yesterday, along with the fact that Manchester United were ready to pay the 10 million euros release clause. And they were now in talks with Sporting Lisbon to try and finalise a deal. Those talks are ongoing because there will be a number of mechanisms within that release clause and stipulations that dictate when you can take him, how long you have to wait, how long Sporting Lisbon can keep hold of him because they're in a critical period of their season in domestic and European action. At the time of recording, they've actually got a game tonight that he's due to be taking charge of. So Manchester United may need to wait a bit. Sporting Lisbon, in the last few hours before we came together for this, released a statement to the stock exchange, as they have to say that they've been approached by Manchester United, who want to take their head coach and they are ready to activate his 10 million euros release clause. And so this really now is hurtling towards a conclusion. Now, until it's done, it's not done. But in the last couple of weeks, as I understand it now, Manchester United knew they had an opportunity to get Ruben Amorim. He was a candidate that they looked at last summer when they interviewed a number of different coaches, managers, including him, but they decided to stick with Erik Ten Hag. His release clause has come down across the course of his contract, and it's now at a stage where they decided that things were not going well enough under Erik Ten Hag and they could get Ruben Amorim. And so they've moved pretty decisively to make sure that he would like to take the job. They got some commitments, it would appear, from Amorim, and then they set about finalising or embarking upon the conversations with Sporting Lisbon in what I've heard is from sort of all sides is a very respectful and cordial way, without wanting to completely disrupt them. Of course, it's been a time of massive flux for them too, because they've lost their sporting director, or will be soon, to Manchester City. And I don't think that Manchester United wanted to make this decision on Erik Ten Hag until they had a firm plan in place. I don't think they would have seen Ruud van Nistelrooy necessarily as an interim for the longer term. He was very much a member of Erik Ten Hag's staff. Contrary to some popular opinion, it was Erik Ten Hag who chose Ruud van Nistelrooy, not Manchester United, even though Manchester United were very much on board with it, a legend of the club, etc. And so they had this opportunity, and given the way that results, performances were going, the trajectory under Erik Ten Hag, and we can come on to that a lot more shortly, I feel they felt that this was the time to act. They will take this step with a 39-year-old manager, which is really quite remarkable. And and place their trust in him for the latest incumbent of the seat that Sir Alex Ferguson vacated in 2013, and nobody has really lived up to the standards that Manchester United have come to expect so far.
Just staying on that point, you mentioned other clubs, and he has been linked. You'll know better than us. Liverpool, there was a link, I think, with Amorim, and didn't he fly to meet West Ham and decided, actually, no, went home and said, really sorry to Sporting Lisbon, actually, no, I'm so sorry. There's been some links. He clearly wants to come to the Premier League. Just fill us in on that background, David.
Yeah, he's very much been emerging in recent years, Ruben Amorim, as the new kid on the block. It was Chelsea, I think, once or maybe even twice, had conversations with him in the aftermath of maybe Thomas Tuchel leaving, before Graham Potter was appointed, after Graham Potter was sacked, before Mauricio Pochettino was appointed. And that showed the regard in which he's held by some of the major European clubs. I think Tottenham have looked very closely at him amid their managerial changes in recent years. It's said that Manchester City would have considered him if and when Pep Guardiola leaves. And then Liverpool, of course, had their big change from Jurgen Klopp, now turns into Arne Slot. They were most heavily linked with Xabi Alonso. Let's not get away from that. But when it became quite clear to them that they weren't going to be able to get Xabi Alonso, and that maybe even a bit on their part as well, that he wasn't quite right for exactly what they're looking for at this moment in time. In and amongst all of that, he did fly to the UK and he held some conversations with West Ham. I don't think it emerged as the sort of opportunity that he wanted to take up, and very publicly got back on a private jet, returned to Sporting Lisbon, and within a press conference he apologised for this very public charade. And that gave you a few maybe reservations about him. Is he desperate to get out of Sporting Lisbon? Is he anxious to get a chance with the Premier League club? Is he pushing too hard? I think he's got a strong personality and he doesn't suffer fools despite being at such a young age himself. And it felt a matter of when rather than if he was going to get one of these top jobs.
Gary, we'll get stuck into the Erik Ten Hag situation in just a tick, but let me, because we're on Amorim. Positive for you?
Manchester United fans are never anything but positive about their managers, whether they're actually being appointed or are in situ, and that was the case with Erik Ten Hag right to the very end, and the same with all the other Manchester United managers. They're very loyal. There will be excitement, but there was excitement when Erik Ten Hag was obviously appointed, because he was one of the new breed that had played fantastic football at Ajax and was supposedly able to come over with a freshness that would bring this exhilarating style of football to Manchester United, and it's never materialised. So I just hope that Ruben Amorim, when he comes into Manchester United, which looks likely to be the case, that he's able to transfer what he's currently got at Sporting Lisbon and his ideals on the game into a group of players at Manchester United and get them playing in the way in which he has, which is, at times, he obviously likes possession, which most teams do, but he likes to play in a quite direct style at times as well, which is a fast-paced football, high pressing, pushing his defence up the pitch. That's something that Erik Ten Hag has not been able to do. Most Manchester United managers, apart from Louis van Gaal actually, have ended up being back 5 yards outside their own box and playing counter-attack for most of the time in the big games. And that's something that's mystifying. I do think that this squad of players, I did say on the very first game of the season of Friday Night Football, I thought was suited to playing three at the back, and Amorim has played three at the back at Sporting Lisbon. I actually think with the likes of Martinez, the lack of pace in Maguire and De Ligt, Lindelof, Yoro's not played yet. The fact that the fullbacks, I think, also don't suit playing as a defensively in a back four. I actually think this will suit the players that Manchester United have got, and he will get better results out of them with that system. So look, I'm positive, just because generally the nature of being a United fan and a football fan is always that you are positive. But there is a level of caution just because of the fact it's not worked in the past, just recently, obviously, for Erik Ten Hag.
Gary, do you think they have rushed into this? Would you have opted for Ruud van Nistelrooy to have taken it a little longer, or even to the end of the season, although that sounds a lot like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's situation? Or are you happy that they've been sort of quite clinical with this and acted quite quickly?
No, I don't think after the recent Ralf Rangnick experience and the fact that I think Ruud himself being loyal to Erik Ten Hag and feeling that he was, he wants to support Erik Ten Hag, I don't think it would have been an option, to be honest with you, in my view. And I don't think it would have been right. So I think every Manchester United fan will be supportive of a new manager coming in straight away. the challenge or the reasons that were given in the summer was that they couldn't find a manager that they wanted to replace Erik Ten Hag, and that was part of the reasoning behind, obviously, Erik Ten Hag staying. I think it was a little bit more than that. I think the fact that there was a groundswell of support for Erik Ten Hag after the cup final victory against City from Manchester United fans, and also an element of being sick of continually changing the manager. And Erik Ten Hag had won 2 trophies in 2 seasons and hadn't been supported by a suitable sporting structure. So I think that there was some good reason why why Erik Ten Hag was kept in the summer, but it's just gone appallingly in this first 9 games in the Premier League. I mean, there's no part of it that you can hang your hat on. The changing of the systems, the changing of the team, the changing of the back four, the attacking stats are appalling. The defensive structure is poor. The football is still got no identity or style. So there was nothing really that you could sort of, if you say, the results are obviously bad. So I can see why they've done it, but it definitely won't have been where they wanted to be. I mean, this is not what they expected when they kept Erik Ten Hag and invested in him in the summer.
David, let me ask you about INEOS. They've got to get this right, haven't they? They've got to get this right. Otherwise, it's going to look even worse when they're going to have to pay even more money to rebuild the squad as well, not least.
Mm-hmm. So that question cast my mind back to the end of Wenger at Arsenal, and he was described to me by some inside the club at the time as being the best possible shield for the hierarchy. He took all the bullets, all the criticism and flack really came his way as they were underachieving, they were failing to win trophies, they were struggling in the transfer market in matches. Whoever was to blame for that, and it was probably a failure that had many fathers, it was directed at Wenger. While Erik Ten Hag was in position, really, especially post-Glazers and in this transition into Ratcliffe taking sporting control, it was Erik Ten Hag. And the moment that you remove him, eyes start to be pointed at the guys who are running the show. And so that's Ratcliffe himself, it's Sir Dave Brailsford, Dan Ashworth, Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox, Christopher Vivell, and so on. This new structure that has been built. And this is a big moment for them, no doubt about it. They've made all of these structural changes of executives and sporting experts, but there was one person that hadn't been changed, and now he has. And it's arguably the most important role of all. Now, when any new ownership or investors come in, you always suspect they want their own man. When we reflect on it now, maybe even when we thought of it at the time, it was a bit of an awkward dance between them all from the get-go. Manchester United, for whatever reason, were being linked with the likes of Gareth Southgate, Graham Potter, Thomas Tuchel very heavily. And then we got to that summer charade, you could say, if you were to be harsh, but also you could look at it on the other side and try and be fair and say they've got to know the market, they've got to have conversations. Of course, they wouldn't have liked it to play out so publicly, but if a change is going to be made, and at that point Erik Ten Hag was approaching the final year of his contract, then maybe due diligence is somewhat understandable if you're not sure if you want to go on. And he's not stupid, Erik Ten Hag, he's experienced and he's a good man, and he conducted himself in a dignified way, but it was way below where Manchester United should have been in pretty much every facet. Now they have to get it right.
Gary, with your trained eye, when you look at that team and that squad, do you think they're better than what they're showing?
They're not as good as I would like them to be, but they're a lot better than what they're showing. That's where I am. I think there's a little bit of both. I think that they should be pushing for top 4, but to be honest with you, again, that might be me being naive and looking at sort of I was quite confident after the transfer window that squad, that group of players could get to top 4. Erik Ten Hag finished 3rd in his first season, and I believe this group is as strong as that. However, what we've seen in this first 9 games is, to be fair, awful. I mean, they were truly awful. And Erik Ten Hag was finished after that Tottenham game. We were in that stadium that day, David. You were there, weren't you, at Old Trafford that day? I just felt as though we'd seen this movie before and this was the writing on the wall. But they're better than what they're showing. They have to be. They have to be better than what they're showing, even just from a structural and organisational perspective. They're all over the place during matches. The gaps from front to back are huge. And they look like, at times, the worst structural team in the league. Every other team, whether you like them or not, and whether they're good or not, you can quite clearly see what it is they're trying to do. With this group of players now, and the ones last season, it's very difficult to understand what the actual style of play is and what we're trying to do. I think Ruben Amorim has got to try and get to that first and work with these players, which I'm sure he'll be told he has to. And let's see whether some of them, with confidence and belief, and maybe a different system, a different style of play, can get to a level that makes you think actually they can contribute to the club in the next few years. Because at the moment, there aren't many, to be fair. I'm thinking that are like that.
I've got to reiterate Gary's point. If there isn't enough quality for Manchester United to be challenging towards the top of the Premier League, then there have to be some big recriminations about what's happened before now. Now, there has been some muddled recruitment because there have been different people in positions of authority to undertake that recruitment or sign it off at executive level. If you think all the way back, Ed Woodward, Richard Arnold, and now there's new incumbents, and people would have had different visions and strategies and thoughts on players. There is also the accusation that they've placed too much trust in and power in the hands of managers to lead the recruitment in recent times rather than the collective. But I would say in the last window that was somewhat different. Ugarte was a club choice. It wasn't an Erik Ten Hag choice. He was top of Manchester United's recruitment list for that number 6 role. And Erik Ten Hag was initially, I think, favouring somebody like Amrabat, partly for financial, also for footballing reasons, and he came on board with Ugarte. Zirkzee was a Manchester United recruitment target, even though he's Dutch and everybody seems to say that was another Ten Hag buy. It wasn't. Okay, maybe De Ligt and Mazraoui because he'd worked with them before, but we are seeing a sort of more collegiate approach at Manchester United now than there was in the past, and that's going to have to continue. And perhaps when I refer to January, maybe there are some sort of small tweaks that can start to be made, whether it's January or next summer. But the onus will be on Ruben Amorim to work within this structure and coach Manchester United.
I think you're absolutely right, David. That's why I'm insistent that the players, I think, have to be kept together at least till the end of the season, because it's been, I've used this phrase before, it's been a graveyard for managers, it's been a graveyard for players. I can only think of Bruno Fernandes in the last 10 years, and look, there might be the odd one other that has actually come to the club and delivered what we thought they would, or exceeded what we thought they would. I can't think of any other player that's actually come into the club over the last 10 years that has exceeded expectations and has got to a level that we thought they may do when they came in. And some of these players we were all really excited about when they entered the club, and other big clubs were after them as well at times. And then you've got managers, as you've said, some fantastic managers. You know, Erik Ten Hag, it's a sad day yesterday when a man loses his job. He's won 2 trophies for Manchester United. He came to Manchester United with a great reputation as being one of the great young coaches and great coaches in Europe. And what's happened is, in the end, that he's not been able to get a style of play that has looked anything like at the club. And it was the same for Ole. It was the same for Jose Mourinho. I do think Louis van Gaal actually is the only coach that's come to United who's actually been able to implement their style of play on the players and get it across the line. And whether we like that or not, the style wasn't everybody's favourite, including me. At least he did that.
Okay, chaps, so my final question, Gary, is on Erik Ten Hag. What do you think his legacy will be?
Oh, his legacy will definitely be the 2 trophies, but specifically the Manchester Derby final victory in the FA Cup last year. That was a special day for every Manchester United fan that won't be forgotten. You know, I remember my childhood, and you go back and think of the sort of the victory over Everton and Norman Whiteside scoring. You know, you remember these moments for the rest of your life, and this won't go away. It was a really, really great day. And look, what I hope, Rebecca, is, and I remember how bad it was when David Moyes got sacked at the time. And the problem is now I'm looking back 10 years later, and we've had another group of managers, including Erik Ten Hag, who've not got much of a better win percentage than David Moyes. So you almost look back and think, well, actually, were we right to sack him at the time? And I just hope in 5 years' time, we're not looking back and thinking, well, actually, was Erik Ten Hag doing a bad job? He was actually... No, it sounds crazy, but you actually look back now and think, well, should we have sacked Jose Mourinho? Should we have sacked David Moyes? Because obviously what's happened since, it's all about the club getting it right for us to start to think about the fact that, and look, we know it's not right at this moment in time. The performances have been really poor this season. The results have been shocking. The league position is terrible, 14th after 9 games. So you can't complain if you're a manager after 2.5 years nearly that you've obviously got this record, that you've been sacked. But his legacy is definitely, I think, winning 2 trophies in 2 seasons through a very difficult point where the club were going through massive transitions in ownership, sporting departments. The recruitment, to be fair, has been appalling for 10 years, and he's been a victim of that himself. I mean, I think he oversaw, what will be regarded as a couple of the worst transfers Manchester United will ever have made, and that will be the signings of Casemiro and Antony for the 150 million pounds in that panic after the Brentford and Brighton losses. I think those 2 signings, which to be fair, Manchester United will pay for, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope that Casemiro can do a great job for the club for 4 or 5 years. I hope that Antony can come good. It's those 2 signings that stand out, and the reason they've had to sign Agati, the reason they've had to go into the transfer market and bring other players in. And I think that was, to me, the ultimate in poor management from above Erik Ten Hag in an owner. I've been there myself, where an owner, it's difficult sometimes to say no, particularly when you're under pressure, and that should have been one big fat no when those 2 players were brought forward at those prices and those contracts and those salaries.
Gentlemen, we've got to leave it there. As always, David, thank you so much for your insight. Enjoy Centre Parks. Looks amazing for anyone who doesn't know what it is. I don't know, it's almost impossible to describe. It's like an amazing family destination holiday in the middle of a forest. That's where it is. David, thank you for joining us on It's Called Soccer.
A total pleasure.
This episode of It's Called Soccer is in association with Allstate. Now, some people just know that they could save hundreds of dollars on car insurance by checking Allstate first. It is always smart to check first. Now, I've learned my lesson the hard way with this. Like, when you don't check the stadium restrictions before a big game and end up having to throw away that giant inflatable bear that you brought with you. Or ordering tickets without checking the seat view first and end up sat behind a pole for the whole game. I have definitely been there. And what if you booked that big holiday before you checked the date of the cup final? Disaster! So yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois. Welcoming in Christina Unkle, our former FIFA referee who talks all things big decisions with us on Ref Watch. Christina, this week, this didn't cost Erik Ten Hag his job. We know that, but it made it kind of easier to sack him, and that was the penalty given. It was the Matthijs de Ligt on Danny Ings. The coming together, as most people are calling it, but it was on the field, nothing, I think I'm right in saying. Then VAR said to the referee, actually, just come and have a look at the screen. Come and look at the screen. Oh, we all know what happens next. Looked at the screen, changed his mind, gave the penalty. Jarrod Bowen converted it. What is going on with the protocol? I thought it was supposed to be umpire's call like it is in cricket, and this season was supposed to be a much higher bar in terms of trying to change the referee's mind. So much to say on this, including the fact that Michael Oliver was the VAR, Christina, and I really want your point of view on this, because if I'm a young, up-and-coming anything, and one of my seniors who's the best at what they do tells me to do something or kind of nudges me a little bit to do something, I ain't doing anything other than what he says. It makes me so mad that is part of this situation. Sorry, 3 things I mentioned there. Go for it.
No, I mean, you're completely correct. It's you have one of your most experienced referees in England, World Cups, right? Euros. We're talking about highly experienced official on the pitch. Now, that being said, you hit on the head, Rebecca. It's got to be a clear and obvious error, right? And this is a decision, and the on-field decision was no penalty. And when you take a look at it, the argument is, who initiated the contact as they were both almost simultaneously swinging into each other's legs? Was there a little bit of a deflection? Did he get a little bit of a ball? Because we're sitting here and debating these considerations just from a clip analysis standpoint, and I think your question too, if anyone's watching this that's from an officiating standpoint that's going up, this is a clip we take and we use in training for this is not a clear and obvious error. We do not want VAR recommendation. I always use the word intervention, but that's not really the proper word, but the VAR recommendation for a penalty decision in it, because this isn't something that, everyone's going to be crying for. The understanding that there might be some mistakes that happen, but here, this isn't even a mistake. I prefer, and the preferred decision is, allow the on-field decision to remain. The preference is, even with VAR removed, that this is not a foul, let alone a penalty in this game. So you have some great points on that. However, I think one of the biggest things here is when you are officiating at that level, right? And the official in the center was an experienced official, is also having that ability and that courage to a certain extent to say, thanks, I appreciate your input, even though you're Michael Oliver. But thank you, but no thank you. I still saw it as I saw it on that day, and I don't think it's yet enough for a penalty. And that's probably for me a bigger discussion when it comes to the professional officials' locker rooms and when they go to their training clips with Howard Webb. That's the discussion that's being had in there. Why would you not have respectfully declined the recommendation?
Christina, I was watching this in the truck on Sunday, and I was surprised that Michael Oliver intervened. But when David Coote went over to look at it on the side of the pitch, he looked at it that many times. It was almost as if he knew. I was screaming, he doesn't think this is a penalty. And yet when he turned around and does this, you're thinking, he's wilted at the end and he's gone for it. It is that, I mean, Rebecca's touched on it. It's that hierarchy, that sort of, if you like, soft power that comes from experienced individuals. Because Rebecca's right. If I'm playing football at the age of 18 or 19, 20 with Brian Robson and Steve Bruce, and they say something to me, I'm unlikely going to go against them in the change room as 18, 19-year-old just because of their sort of sway and their power and their influence. That must be the same for referees.
I mean, there is. You're thinking of Michael Oliver, who has the most advanced training when it comes to not just FIFA, but, the UEFA preferences, working consistently in the Champions League, that you're going to subconsciously or consciously give a little bit of preference to it. But I always remember in the locker room, when I was doing my pregame with my team, I would literally take my FIFA badge on my chest and I would kind of put my hand over it. And I said, I don't care that I carry a white FIFA badge, right? And you're not at the highest levels and an international. You need to give me the advice as you give me, right? If for some reason I'm doing something incorrect, you need to have the courage to be able to give me factual scenarios or considerations and not be afraid of or dissuaded based upon my level or my experience for that. Because if not, then you find yourself in these situations. And you're right, but David's an experienced official, and I know they've known each other for a long period of time. So I think that's where, maybe they don't want to offend each other, quote unquote, but I don't think that's the case. I truly think at that level, you can't be offended if you don't take someone's recommendation. You can. And if you're offended at that level, then you shouldn't be officiating at that level.
So, Christina, the question then is, why was Michael Oliver intervening? What? He's supposed to be the best referee in the Premier League. Why did he... I don't understand why he thought that was a clear and obvious error that he had to get involved in. He should know more than anybody how high the bar needs to be for him to intervene.
So one thing I will say is when you are sitting in that VAR room, it's dark, it's black, kind of a pitch for sometimes, unless they light it up. I preferred mine dark. You can start kind of second guessing yourself when you're looking at a clip and you're playing it over and you're your first instinct, going back to Gary's point, when you get sent to the monitor, you should sit there and be oof, right? You should have that feeling in the pit of your stomach, and that's how you know it's a clear and obvious error. However, sometimes you start to doubt yourself when you're in that VAR booth. And I think that I know that there are different skill sets that you need, because I've been a VAR as well, on the inside that booth versus being on that pitch, right? So you might instinctively be a very good official on the pitch, but yet you might which is kind of ironic, right? Second question yourself or doubt yourself in that booth because it's quiet, you don't want to make a mistake. So
Christina, do you think, sorry, just to interrupt you, do you think there should be separation? Do you think referees on the field should only referee on the field and VAR should only VAR?
I'm going to say no, because there are some people who have an exception to the rule. Some people who have a skill set who can do both of that. So it's not a clear black and white, but I do know that there are some officials that just shouldn't be put in the VAR booth. They just don't have necessarily that skill set, because it is a very technical and more of a linear thought process, right? Especially when it comes to the gray areas. You have to be very kind of quick and clear, be able to take a look at the considerations and go through that list. But some people are just very good at the natural feel and being on the pitch. And then when you're in that VAR booth, it turns into a little bit of science. And then there's a skill set that could be lost in that one. So I'm not going to say yes or no to that, just because I do know that some people, I know here in the United States, John Freeman in Major League Soccer, very good on the pitch and very good in the VAR booth. So I would never want to take him from either. But also, to be very good in the VAR booth, you also have to have been on that pitch to be able to feel and kind of be able to put that stuff in context when you're in that VAR booth and you don't feel that energy, but you know what that energy would have felt like because you've been there.
Christina, one of the things that I sort of concerned myself with when I went down to Stockley Park when it was first introduced into the Premier League, I think it's 2 or 3 years ago now. One of the concerns that I had, when you sort of, even as a commentator, you get to the stadium and you get to feel the game, you feel the atmosphere, you sense things that are going on. Because the VAR officials are so removed, if they were in a hospitality box in the stadium and you're watching the game as well and you're feeling the atmosphere, sometimes you can see by players' reactions as well, whether there is actually an element of, was there an actual massive reaction from the crowd? Was there a big reaction from the players? You can sense things in the stadium that you don't sense in a VAR sort of booth. I call it a wardrobe, basically, sort of 20, 30 miles away. And you just sat there probably. I've got this vision of sort of you've got your coffee on one side, you've probably got your sweets on the other. You know what I mean? You're waiting for something to happen. A bit like me in the commentary box. You know what I mean? It's like, I can imagine you being almost disconnected from the atmosphere and the feeling. Does that happen?
It does. You actually do feel disconnected. I mean, we don't have coffees and sweets. That's actually not allowed. We used to. We got in trouble for it. It's not like the ITV Euros, right? Where like my producer guy kept giving me like biscuits. You all eat a lot of biscuits, by the way. I thought I was going to lose weight on my trip.
That's because they're amazing.
Yeah.
That's because they're amazing.
Biscuits. Java cakes. I've never had a Java cake in my life until this summer.
You're welcome.
They were mind-blowing. Yes, you guys did that right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you can be removed from that in that box, right? So we think about the Liverpool match, right, of last year, right? Like how that was lost and how if they would have been and had felt that environment, they would have been able to kind of probably say, you know what, this is for bigger football than it is for our mistake. Now, you do need to keep them isolated from, the protection, the technology, and going back to it's a little bit more of a linear scientific process. But I do know what you mean. And I think that's why I say, like, ideally, when you have someone in the VAR booth, it's someone who has been on that pitch before, because even when, to your point, we commentate, I know when I commentate from a referee standpoint, I don't like commentating off of, off the monitor or from a computer or remotely. I prefer it being in person, because then I know what's going on in the in the technical area. I know what's going on in management. I know what the substitutions are doing to egg on that player, to encourage them to come in more for that challenge, right? I could see the second AR and their kind of body language and mechanics. So you can't fully see that and appreciate that in the VAR booth. So there's a little bit of love lost there, but you kind of have to have it still segregated.
I got to say, there is no way you would go into Stockley Park and not find bags of Haribo. 1,000%. They are. Maybe in Major League Soccer, they're super professional. They don't do sweets, but there's definitely Haribo at Stockley Park. Okay, Christina, another brilliant one from you. Thank you so much. We'll speak to you
Christina.
soon. Okay, Gary, for our All-State moment of the week, what have you gone for?
I've gone for Rodri as the winner of the Ballon d'Or.
But I'm not sure that's the story. We're going to get to the story in a second. Before we get to Vinicius Jr. Hosting Paris parties before he didn't actually need to. The story is Vinicius Jr. But no, let's talk about Rodri. I mean, it's the first Spanish player, first of all, since 1960. It's ridiculous. First Premier League player to win Ballon d'Or since 2008, Cristiano Ronaldo. First ever Manchester City player. There is a section of people, Gary, who think it shouldn't go to a kind of artists and soldiers, right, in football sometimes, and he's definitely more of a soldier, but you're not on that page.
No, absolutely not. I was actually, to be fair, I'm quite offended by the reaction towards Vinicius Jr. not winning it by, to be fair, his fellow professionals as well, because for me, Rodri, aside from the fact that he's an amazing player and had the greatest influence, I believe, on his club team and on his international team in winning a major tournament, he's actually a player's player. He's a player that everybody in the world should love, almost unified behind the idea that Rodri is just a very special player and brings an amazing amount of influence to a football team. And he's the best midfield player in the world by a mile at this moment in time. I cannot believe, having watched Rodri the way in which I have and talked about him the way in which I have, he's the one player I would take out of the City team straight away if I was a Manchester United fan or if I was an Arsenal fan.
Before
going with
Haaland?
them to the league. Absolutely. He holds them together. His record with and without Rodri is absolutely, they lost 4 or 5 games last season, Manchester City, when he didn't play. We talk about having no leaders nowadays. We talk about having no sort of, if you like, big presences. He's outstanding, Rodri. That's been for a number of years. And his consistency and his reliability and his level of performance is absolutely amazing. Now, I can understand people in Madrid and people in Brazil being upset that their boy hasn't won it because he's a special talent. I feel in doing what they've done, to disrespect Rodri in the way in which they have, I think it naturally does that. I think it's absolutely outrageous. I mean, honestly, I thought it was more outrageous. I mean, Messi winning it, was it last year? I thought was a big... Yeah, I thought that was, to be fair, I thought that was wrong, personally, at that time. I just didn't think he was World Player of the Year. And yet that one sort of got a little bit of controversy. This seems to have sort of gone on to another scale. And honestly, I'm absolutely delighted. Not from a point of view, I'm not a City fan, and people know that. I'm delighted Rodri has won the Ballon d'Or. I'm delighted it's gone to a player who has contributed week in, week out consistently at such a high level for his club and his country, winning the European Championships. They weren't favourite, by the way. They were nowhere near favourites for winning the Euro, Spain. And they've got there. Obviously, he came off in the final at half-time. But he's absolutely immense. And he's immense for Manchester City last season. Now, Vinicius is a star. He's a wonderful player. But to me, the idea that basically Rodri doesn't deserve to win it, he's just playing wrong. It's because you don't value players that play in different positions or have different levels of quality or different types of quality to the one that looks the most skillful. The Ballon d'Or isn't about the most skillful and talented, in my opinion. It's about the best player and most important player. And I think that is Rodri.
Yeah, he's super classy as well. And what was interesting, you mentioned last year, Pep Guardiola was asked this morning in his press conference, about Vinicius Jr. and Real Madrid's reaction. And he, without being overt, he said, well, last year Messi won it and Erling Haaland had just won the Champions League and scored like 75,000 goals. Yeah. So it was a kind of a ... And you're right, it was so unbelievably classy. So according to The Athletic I read this morning, Gary, Vinicius Jr. flew over a bunch of his family from Brazil. Super arrogant. Set up 2 parties. One in Paris after the event, booked a place, organised it. One in Madrid for when he returned home as the number 1. Nike, who have a part to play in this, have released a Ballon d'Or boot for Vinicius. I mean, the arrogance is off the scale. I actually think he should now be disqualified for the arrogance. Gary, is so outrageous. And then you see Rodri with his acceptance speech and everything he said about how he's winning this for the likes of Iniesta and Xavi and all the Spanish players who never got to win it, and Busquets. You just think the difference is it's actually gross what he did.
Rodri's a class act on and off the pitch, and I'm delighted. I say I'm going to repeat it again. I'm delighted he won it. And what I would have hoped, but obviously you don't get that. You don't tend to get that from Real Madrid players because there's an entitled feel about the club. Just generally, that's the way in which they are, and they produce some of the great players of all time. And so Real Madrid have great players. But what I would have liked to have happened would be that Vinicius Jr. would have still travelled to the awards, that he would have invited Rodri to his party after, and that he would have celebrated with him and said, "Well done, Rodri, you're an amazing player, and I'm just something. Next year, I hope I can win it." Because that, to me, is what class looks like. We don't get that. All the Real Madrid players don't turn up to the event. The manager doesn't turn up to the event. I think there were 5 Real Madrid players that were awarded with trophies on the night, or awards of some kind, and none of them turned up out of protest, I suspect, of the fact that Vinicius has not won it. Like I say, Vinicius is a special talent. He's amazing. He's going to win it one day, I'm sure. But the idea that you try and take the glory away and sort of pull the sort of spotlight away from a player who is, I get it, he's a fan's player, he's a player's player, he's someone who will be respected all around the world, and a good man, I just think he's classless. I agree with you completely.
And also, his manager, Carlo Ancelotti, is not a man who's classless. If you've come across Carlo Ancelotti in your life, he's a man full of class. He didn't go. And he won Best Coach. He didn't go. Best Female Player, just quickly, Aitana Bonmati won it for the 2nd year running. And Women's Coach of the Year, Emma Hayes, which was brilliant. But yeah, the whole thing classless. I mean, it did distract, I suppose, from the El Clasico hammering. So I don't know which PR is worse, losing to Barcelona in the way they did or doing this. The whole club at the moment is not coming out smelling of roses. That is for certain. Well, luckily, Vinicius Jr. isn't the only person who knows party planners in Paris, because Rodri did manage to have himself a proper celebration, and rightly so. Great scenes there, much deserved, from the 2024 Ballon d'Or winner, Rodri. Now, the Give and Go podcast joins the show to bring us up to date on the playoffs in Major League Soccer.
6 out of 8 first leg matches in the MLS round 1 of playoffs have been completed, and we got some drama, some results to cover here, starting with Messi's Inter Miami getting a 2-1 result against Atlanta United.
And it was Inter Miami's first playoff game in the MLS, and it only took them 2 minutes to get on the score sheet, with Luisito Suarez getting on the board 1-0, but it ended up being end-to-end. Atlanta United equalized, but then the stars came out for Inter Miami. Not just Messi, not just Suarez, Suarez, but Jordi Alba with an absolute banger, giving Miami the lead 2-1. They end up winning it.
That's why he's one of the best fullbacks of all time, in my opinion. What a golazo. We have MLS Cup contenders LA Galaxy defeating the Colorado Rapids 5-0 at home, essentially rendering that second leg useless.
Yeah, pretty much. And you look at Colorado's form going into the playoffs, 4 straight losses. So this isn't super surprising when you look at LA Galaxy's offense, the way that Ricky Pucci is playing, he gets a double. LA Galaxy went absolutely off in this match. They look better than ever, but against a very poor Colorado side.
But you can extend this positivity of LA out to LAFC as well, and even the LA Dodgers in the World Series, as LAFC gets a result 2 at home, winning 2-1 against the Vancouver Whitecaps.
LAFC's classic wing attack with Oliveira on one side, Buanga on the other, started to really stretch Vancouver's defense. Over the course of the 90 minutes, LA just took advantage, exploited Vancouver's backline, got a couple goals. Vancouver actually got a late goal at the end, but I just don't see them doing anything in this series.
Yeah, they're staying in punching range, but I think LAFC has the quality to stave them off if needed. That home field advantage has proven itself to be vital in these first 6 matches as every home team won, including the Seattle Sounders today, defeating Houston Dynamo in a penalty shootout to get the win here in this best-of-3 series.
Yeah, the Roldan brothers closing this out for Seattle in the penalty shootout. This is going to be really intriguing to see game 2.
And we have 2 more intriguing matchups left with potential MLS Cup contenders Columbus facing off against New York Red Bulls and Real Salt Lake hosting Minnesota United in these important knockout stage matches, which actually leads me to my question for the It's Called Soccer crew and Gary specifically. What changes did you make in preparing for knockout stage football in comparison to what you faced off against in the regular season? Let us know.
So, Gary, what changes did you or Manchester United make when you were preparing for knockout football compared to league games?
Oh, I think we definitely would alter our game for knockout football at times. Well, Europe, you would definitely change system at times, become a more pragmatic. Think about, particularly if you're away from home, the idea of not conceding a goal and trying to sort of go on the counter-attack. We certainly didn't high press. Whereas actually in the league sometimes we obviously would try and sort of always be on the front foot. But I think I think to do whatever was necessary to win was a mantra at Manchester United, whether it was a league game or a cup game, but it seemed to be even more emphasised when it was in a cup game. So the idea that you would be 1-0 up in a cup game, the substitutions and the way in which you'd approach the game might be different than if you're 1-0 up in the league. In the league, we'd always try and go for that second goal. And the essence of a cup game would mean that ultimately you sometimes think that as well. But in a cup game, you might do it in a more cautious fashion. Because the team that are actually playing against you become more desperate. What happens in a cup game is because they've got nothing to lose and they know they're going to be knocked out if they're losing 1-0. You know at some point in the game they're going to have to get desperate, and that's when you can go and get a counter-attacking goal. So it is quite different mentality. And some coaches, some managers, some players are just absolutely perfect for setting up for what would be knockout football.
Plenty more to come from the Give and Go guys this season. Gary, I think I can hear a paella calling your name right now. You better go. We'll see you next week.
I'm away. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, everybody. Make sure you subscribe, as always, to It's Called Soccer. We will see you next week.